this podcast. I'm Ashwin, and I'll quickly start with the goal of this podcast, right? And we have Swapnil, Sagnik, and Shounak with us. Before the introductions, I'll quickly tell you about the goal, right? So a lot of people reach out to me for help with making more informed decisions, right? They don't know about consulting, growth, strategy. All these are buzzwords for them. What exactly does a consultant do? How do we transition? What are the career trajectories? How do they look like, right? So the goal of this podcast is to help people make more informed decisions in terms of the roles they choose, the companies they choose, and how do they, and everything in between. We want to keep it very natural, conversational, candid, and the goal is to bring about those unique insights which are not available in blogs, YouTube, even other YouTube videos, or whatever there is in between, right? These things come out only through conversations that we have in these schools, on those chai ki tapris, right? And maybe all those conversations that happen on a mentorship level. So I'm Ashwin. I'm working in the product team at Udaan. I also graduated, just like Swapnil, I also graduated from IIT Ropar. That's a quick intro. So I'm working in the lending arm of Udaan, which is Udaan Capital. We lend to SMEs across India. People who are buying from Udaan as well as people who are not buying from Udaan, right? We lend across the board. Swapnil, over to you for the quick intro.
Sure. My name is Swapnil. I have earlier graduated from IIT Ropar. Then I went to IIMB Bangalore for my MBA. Post that, I interned at Kearney, got a PPO at Kearney, worked there for close to 2 years, and then ventured out, moved to Meesho at that point in time. A lot of teams were getting built in 21. So 21 I moved to Meesho, and for past 3 years I've been working at Meesho primarily at the seller side of things, right? So everything around seller growth, their acquisition, activation, retention on the platform. So for everyone, Meesho is a e-commerce marketplace where we connect sellers to buyers, right? So the other two part of the platform, I look at the seller side of things. Yeah, happy to be here and interacting with everything.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Ashwin. So my name is Sagnik. I'm an IIT Delhi graduate and an IIM Calcutta MBA graduate. I graduated in 2017, after which I joined Bain company. So as an associate consultant. Spent 3 years in consulting, very nice journey, would love and looking forward to talk about it more. But after around 3 years, during the peak of COVID, when EdTech was taking off, I joined Unacademy. Just a brief introduction of Unacademy, it's India's largest learning platform. We prepare candidates for all types of exams from JEE, NEET, UPSC, the GATE exams, and so on and so forth. And I currently work there as a director of academic operations. And that's about me. That's about my career trajectory so far.
Understood. Thanks a lot for that. Shounak, over to you.
Yeah. Okay. So again, good to be here with you guys and talking about consulting and consulting professions. I'm happy to share and also to learn because my consulting experience started in 2013. After I left, I graduated from IIM Calcutta. Then I spent about 4 years in Kearney. At that point of time, it was called AT Kearney, but right now it's called Kearney. I worked mostly in Southeast Asia and a bit in India as well. Post that, in 2019, I set up Inxite, which is a firm basically focusing on developing AI solutions for clients. Right, so that's what we started with, and over the last 1.5 years, etc., we are focusing a lot on application of generative AI and ChatGPT-like models to businesses, and that's what is going to be our primary growth and focus area going forward. So more than happy to share about my consulting journey and going from consulting to starting a company, not necessarily working in an established startup, which has different kind of perks and challenges. So yeah, happy to be here and looking forward to a good conversation.
Perfect. Thanks a lot for that. And we'll definitely deep dive into the consulting to entrepreneurship journey. I want to start with why you did an MBA, right? What was the goal you wanted to achieve? And did you reach that objective, right? did you reach some other objective, or that goal was met, right? You wanted to do an MBA for this reason and that reason was met. So why don't you start?
I clearly remember the SOP I wrote, right? IIM Bangalore has this process where you write SOPs and you mention why you want to join IIM Bangalore, and one of the reasons that I mentioned was, hey, I want to do marketing, right? Like, I feel that that evokes or satisfies the creative side of me and will be a good mix of strategy plus being creative, right, at the same front. But of course, as soon as I entered IIM Bangalore, I realized that, hey, it is not what I thought it of, right? To me, marketing was advertising, some of that, but marketing is a lot more than that, right? What I felt, maybe expectation reality mismatch happened, and at the same time, of course, when you enter the campus, you immediately go into a phase where you start preparing your resume, you start applying for internships within 2-3 months of you getting onto campus, right? I realized that I applied across all the companies, right? I didn't keep it limited that, hey, I'll only apply to marketing companies. I also applied to consulting companies. What I didn't apply to was banking and the finance space, right? Because I was not very comfortable with the space, my knowledge about the space. So I felt I'm not ready to get anything there. So yeah, cutting long story short, I think what I realized was I started getting consulting shortlisted and I started preparing for consulting interviews, right? I really enjoyed the entire journey of structuring a problem statement, breaking down into simpler parts. I felt that this is something I didn't know before I joined IIMB. And as soon as I started exploring this, I really started enjoying that process. Then went into the interviews, cleared those, got an internship as well. At the same time, I applied to the PNGs and the HULs.
Right.
Could not even clear the psychometric there. So I felt eventually something I was not aware of before campus. I found that I enjoyed that a lot more, and even now, right, when I work in a startup, I feel those elements of problem solving, structuring it, breaking it down into simpler parts, and then now executing it, taking it a step further and executing and living with the long term consequences. I think, yeah, so not got what I wanted, but yeah, explored a lot of new things when I entered campus. And
I think a lot of brilliant insights there. You took that breaking down the problem statement from the consulting to the startup experience, consulting experience to startup experience. That is one of the things you.
Yeah, which is why I feel a lot of startups also hire consultants at a point in time that you structurally look at the entire problem statement, right? I think one of the things which is used across is being MECE, which is mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive, which is that you try to avoid as many blind spots as you can, and you try to be as structured and try to go deeper in a structured manner and not go solution first and some of those, right, which is important. So I think that's how it happened for me. But yeah.
But I think Sagnik, if you can tell us about your experience, and also if you can cover whether consulting is very competitive in these schools. Getting into MBA and Kearney is very competitive. If you can also touch upon that.
Sure. So firstly about my experience, when I went in, it was with some broader objectives. Like I said, MBA gives you a certain growth in your career trajectory. MBA gives you exposure to certain roles which don't really come about when in your engineering. Like I'll give an example here. Your typical finance companies that come to say an IT are your Capital One, which comes on day one, for example. The biggest IB that comes is Deutsche Bank on day zero. In IIMCAD, the biggest IB that comes is Citibank, right? So automatically there are some opportunities which MBA gives you more of compared to say an engineering degree, and that was the thought process I had in mind, that more career trajectories open up, better networking possibility. You'll be in a college with people who will end up taking leadership roles in various companies. So that was what attracted me. When I came in, so I would say partially yes, the objective was realized. But what I also really got, which I didn't realize a lot at the start, is the way that you do business-based problem solving. Is really something that you learn more of when you do your MBA compared to say any other degree or any other outside of directly working in that kind of a space. Like doing business-based problem solving at scale is something that MBA really teaches you. You understand how to look at markets, you understand how to analyze business metrics in a better way. I think, that was what I expected and what I ended up realizing in the MBA experience. Networking is, I think, the biggest thing. I'm in close touch with a lot of my alums even now, and a lot of my batchmates, and I think keep hearing fascinating things about what they're doing. Coming to your second question about whether it's a competitive environment to get into an MBB, for sure. It's your consulting firms, the big fours, take the first, like the initial slots of placement. There are 3 days of placement: day 0, day 1, day 2. On day 0, morning 8 to 11, they would come in, they would pick their candidates, they'd leave.
Understood.
And so in a batch of say 450, a total of say 30-40 candidates would at most go into the big four, right? Not including internships and PPOs. So
in a batch of?
In a batch of 450.
Was it the same in IIMCs?
So I think it is a function of years. So across A, B, C, I think you will find similar number or similar proportion will vary by 4 or 5 percentage points here or there, right? But
Got it.
I think it is a function of year also. What I realized, like when I was there, like a firm will come and take say 12 to 15 interns and give 6 to 7 PPOs, right? And then they will come for finals as well. So overall they will take say 10 to 15 candidates per firm, right?
Understood.
Prior to that it was lesser. Post that I saw this number rising to 20-30 per company, right? Last year, like this year in the placement, I've seen that number going down again. So it is a function of macroeconomic trends as well to some extent, but at least I saw during the 2-3 years, right? During my batch and post that, the numbers were increasing from every batch. Currently, the numbers are a lot lower.
Last 2 years, I think numbers are down, and there's a newsletter by the Ken. Day Zero is the name. They cover this in extensive detail. I think would also recommend to people wanting to understand more about the B school scenario, placement scenario. So you mentioned 10% conversion rate, right? During your time, let's say.
In my year, yeah.
Understood.
Yeah.
Over to you.
Yeah. So generally, my answer is a bit cruder than what my other co-podcasters have said so far. So when I graduated so I was a IT graduate. I had a job in Microsoft after my undergrad, and I had given the CAT exam because my friends etc. were also giving it, and I got it right for some. And at that point of time, my key motivating factor to do an MBA was actually to go for higher money, right? Very simply put, at 21 years of age, that is what motivates you further. And then once we kind of got into IIMC, right, it was a completely different world because till date I had been mostly a techie guy. I was not very focused in all the other aspects of business, etc. So you go and see a completely different world, and a lot of the choices which you make are actually governed by your peer, right? So the way the placements are structured, and I'm also partly to blame for that because I have been a placer and I have not done anything to change it, right? So in our time, the top 2 sectors, which were banking and consulting, are just structured in day 0 today. At that point of time, our batch was the first batch of 460 people. Okay, before that was 300 odd people. It was bumped up to 460, and we used to get about 100 day 0 offers. Okay, out of which 20 to 25 offers at max would come from your MBB and AT Kearney. Post that, although there is no reason to believe this way, was people considered Accenture, right, which used to give a healthy dose of offers, but there used to be a huge craze for banking because banks used to offer good money. They used to offer positions in, abroad. So for example, I have done my internship with UBS in Hong Kong, right? So it was a completely different experience, right? I have never seen anyone being paid that much money then and even now, right, for the amount of work which we were made to do. And people really love to go to banking, and banks, for example, even in my batch, banks like RBS, Bank of America did make double-digit offers, right? They were just recovering out of the financial crisis. So that was the thing. Apart from that, you had your HULs, Asian Paints, and PNGs of the world. But again, the way the placement is structured, very often you don't get an equal opportunity. even though you might be more suited for it, but you will hedge and you will go towards consulting and banking. And the startup revolution hadn't come, right? So Amazon, Flipkart, they hired for the first time in my final placements. And people were okay, skeptical, people who had a bit of experience, they were interested in look at those things. So net, when you were given the options of a well-rounded job where you could actually push back pursuing what you're really good at, right? And it give you good pay and good exposure to multiple things, was consulting. And unless you had come from a prior experience of banking, which some people had and they were very focused on banking, people would prefer a consulting profession with the top 4 consulting firms of the day, right? So
this is
yes,
2013. Sorry, this is 2013.
This is 2013. So in hindsight, we can say that, I can say that I had that's what I have told in the interviews in consulting, that, working with multiple sectors, different business stakeholders, etc. But primary motivations were money, there is a attraction to consulting of a lifestyle, of a thing. So that's what kind of motivated me to consulting. However, in my 4 years of consulting, that has changed significantly. And but that's in a nutshell, a very crude answer, but that's what really the motivation was. And to be very honest, I think a lot of people will be driven by that, and peer pressure will drive a very big aspect and the structure of placements to where you will end up with, which you might or might not like in hindsight. And as I think we'll discuss sometime, that a bunch of people, a very high percentage, actually leave consulting within a very short period of time. Right, and that's the reason why that happens, because people are motivated by these factors to get into consulting.
Definitely, I think a lot of points were very valuable here. One, you mentioned peer pressure. So one of the goals of this podcast is to help people make more informed choices, not informed by or not dictated by peer pressure itself, right? So you talked about international offers. What's the percentage of international offers then and now, maybe? Like, what was the percentage?
Now I do not know because I don't keep track. But then it used to be, I would say about on day zero, about 10 to 15%. And it was actually very low, right? Very low, because couple year before, etc., in our senior batches, etc., we had offers exclusively from, let's say, Morgan Stanley's, JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank in London, and those used to be the cream offers, right, which people used to go for. Second degree international offers were based in Southeast Asia, Singapore and Hong Kong and Dubai, right? And then you had, and mostly they were coming from banking. Once in a while you would get something in consulting. I mean, I have known people who've gotten McKinsey and the USA, right, as an internship, or sometimes even as a thing. But because we are a college where people can go just after campus, right, at 20, 21 years of age, where in the Western world, people come mostly with experience. So there is a different designation being created for us, which does not necessarily always exist in the Western world. So unless you reach that designation, it's very difficult for them to absorb. But yeah, people have that. And that's primarily what used to happen back then. Today, I actually do not have much exposure, except for the fact that on social media, etc., I see a lot of people are unable to find very good jobs. Right. So beyond that, I don't track much.
I'd like to talk about this piece also a little bit. Like, you have to see how it has evolved. See, the first decade of say this millennium, right? And I was speaking to an alumni, I remember. He told me that the offers, the day zero offers typically used to be like investment banking, and the type of discussions which used to happen is where will I be placed? New York, London, Hong Kong, Singapore, like that, right? So international offers, investment banking were actually the go-to offers back at that point of time. Cut to at least when I was graduating, that at that time it was equally balanced almost between investment banking and consulting. And international offers were extremely rare. In fact, my batchmates were actually equally motivated for the India-based offers, or even more so. Like Citibank Mumbai was more motivating than say Nokia Finland, right? And a lot of decisions also get driven.
The role, sorry, Nokia Finland. What's the role?
It was a marketing manager role.
Okay, okay.
Right? So a lot of decisions also get driven by what's going to be there on D0. And what is there on D0 has changed over the years. Because that decision gets made based on how many roles you can offer, what salaries you can offer, those kind of things. And over time, consultants have started matching the number of roles and salaries that investment banking companies had to offer.
Yeah, I think few of the things just to add to what Shounak and Sagnik said, that I think recently while I was graduating, I saw a lot of consulting companies from the Middle East and other regions coming in and then placing it. So for example, BCG would come and they would also hire for their Dubai office.
Right.
Or Saudi office. Similarly, a lot of strategy and other consulting firms which are, say, a lot more focused in the Middle East geography. I think that was a trend that I observed, and they have been coming for last 3-4 years now that I've heard. So a lot of our batchmates also got placed in consulting in locations outside of India. Of course, US and other offices are still rare, but at least the nearby geographies is where they have started. But EY Parthenon was one of the firms, strategy, and these are some of the consulting firms which used to either have their offices in Dubai or Singapore and used to hire for those offices.
Understood. So you mentioned Parthenon, LEK maybe.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, and this is a question for all of you, the split between MBB, Kearney, that's like the tier 1, let's say consulting, probably then boutique firms, or let's say LEK, EY Parthenon, and third one would be probably, one sector specialized firms, even ZS consulting maybe, or even, so tier 1, 2, 3, if I were to call it that, I'm not sure. But then what's the split between these three in terms of the offers in B school, for example?
Yeah, I think what Shounak was also saying, right? Accenture used to give a lot of offers.
Yeah,
So,
Accenture. Accenture would be probably the second.
Accenture would be just like MBA plus and then Accenture, right? It's at a different grade. See, EY, Parthenon, and these companies before EY was EY and Parthenon was Parthenon, right? So then Parthenon used to be a very small player in the entire scheme of things. But after even strategy and etc., they used to come hire 1 or 2 people, even Roland Berger, right? But after they have been acquired by the bigger companies, they have become more mainstream. Right? But if you see consulting, if you take MBA plus Accenture, you would have 80% of your offers come from there.
Is that true? Is that true in your case also?
Honestly, difficult to remember the numbers exactly, but as far as I recall, say around I think 17-20% of my batch got into consulting. 10% was in the 8-10% was in the tier 1, and followed up by the Accenture. I think Accenture gave probably around half the remaining offers.
Understood.
And then there was a lot of firms like Arete, Optus, etc., which sort of made up for the rest.
yeah, just to look in terms of numbers, right? Like for example, as I said, during my time, say PPO plus finals, say a McKinsey, BCG, Bain, Kearney used to hover in between say 12 to 20 candidates per firm, right? But and Accenture might be 30 to 40, taking like PPO plus. But if you look at some of the boutique consulting, as Shounak said, I think it will be 2-3 per firm, right? Like that's the range in which they will hire, maybe one here or there, but yeah. So
understood.
And when you look at consulting also, right, when you structure in the reports and all that, you would have a lot of Indian consulting firms, right? Not Impact, I forget the names, but the Indian consulting firms who are catering to Indian businesses, etc. So as a sector, everything is consulting, but I would not, in terms of work quality and the entire exposure and mentoring and guidance and growth opportunities you would get, I would not necessarily put all of them in the same bracket as, let's say, even a ZS versus some of the local Indian consulting firms.
Understood. So I think we have an idea around how many people get into consulting from, let's say, the total batch strength, and within those, let's say, 80 people, let's say 100 people in 450, how many actually get into, let's say, MVP, K and Accenture, and that number out of 100 would be close to, let's say, 60 is my understanding from our discussion, about 20 in the other global consulting firms, and about 10-20 in the Indian consulting firms, or let's say the firms which are not the real consulting that we talk about, right? That's my understanding from our discussion. If we talk about, and also I think you talked about salary ranges, we should also, I think, talk about that. What's the range? What's the entry level bucket? For what's the role? First of all, I think Bain, McKinsey, and BCG have different roles, right, across. So in one of the firms they call it a senior analyst, in one of the firms they call it a junior consultant, and in another one they call it a consultant. So, but the range I just want to understand. What's the, for example, in Kearney, what was the range maybe, or other as well?
I think the fixed or maybe the base component used to be around 22 to 25 lakhs per annum, around 25 lakhs per annum, and then you used to have your annual bonuses, which used to be based on your performance. And
10%,
this role
or
used
what's the annual bonuses?
bonuses could range like it was performance driven, right? So depending on your rating, but it could range between at the senior business analyst, which Kearney used to call, right, the entry level role after MBA. I think it could range anything between 6% to 15%, or maybe 6 to 12%, right, in that range, and then gets prorated basis how many months you have worked, all of those. So yeah, I think that would be the range, starting range for Kearney. But maybe we can add.
Yeah, I mean, remember this was 2017 when I was getting placed in Bain. So the role they offer you when you're joining from say an IIM is called junior consultant. Right? That basically means in 2 years. So initially you'll be playing a supporting role in a say a work stream, but in 2 years you'll become a consultant. You'll lead a work stream on your own, right? So at that time salary range was somewhere around 20-25. Around 15% of it was fixed. This was like the joining amount. So fixed on. So sorry, what I mean is 20 to 25 fixed and 15% on top of that as a variable. That was the sort of range. And I mean there were buckets. I mean, for example, you spend 1 year, your salary sort of increases by 15%. Then you make a big jump when you become consultant, and so on. That's the way it happens at Bain.
Understood. What's the typical jump? Like, what's the typical increment when you become a consultant?
So back in my time, the jump was around somewhere around 25%.
Understood. Understood. Shounak, how about your time?
Yeah, so I think the base salary was not very different. I'm a bit surprised by that because our base salary was 20 lakhs flat, right? And on top of that, yeah, bonuses could be 10, 15, 20% depending on your performance, etc. So, however, since we are talking about consulting as an industry and not just these two firms, as per market reports, etc., I mean, in terms of the higher paying packages, BCG, etc., is known to pay higher and more aggressive in career growth as opposed to, let's say, Kearney. I'm not very sure about Bain. Even McKinsey, etc. I think what the perception I had, and again, needs to be validated, but they had more aggressive variable structures, right? So they're more meritocratic in terms of their payment structure. So even though your bases, etc., could be the same, your actual take home, if you are performing well, could be in a different dimension altogether, right? So, however, compared to what the rest of the thing pays, at least the initial set of consulting firms do pay upwards of 25 today, I'm guessing. That would be a good way of characterizing the thing. There could be various different structures on top of that which are offered to people. Especially because initially, even when I was hiring at Kearney, we had started offering positions for, let's say, we were getting people with 3-4 years of prior experience. Right, so we were also giving people a higher designation at times, right, if they had the capabilities and skills. Because for example, people go to ZS, right, after their undergraduate, then they do an MBA, and then they want a consulting offer, right? So if someone has that kind of experience, initially it was quite rigid, right, but towards the end, because people wanted talent, right, people were flexible to offer them higher pay packages and higher designations or a faster growth trajectory going forward. So that's the kind. So if there are different kind of people listening to this, their prior experience can also be factored in while they're joining a consulting experience. Is what
very valid.
that's one.
Super.
The other thing which happened later is that even consulting firms started opening different specialized positions. So what we are talking about is that we went into general consulting, right? Stock. In Kearney, we had a role called PAS, which was Procurement Analytics Services, right? As consulting look going more into analytics and implementation oriented activities, right? Even if you look at the open market today, they are hiring people who are specifically experts in, let's say, private equity or infrastructure or things like that. And even at the junior level from campus, we had started hiring for positions which are specifically into analytics. Maybe there are more positions today also. So there are multiple roles being offered from consulting firms also, and it's not just one position and one salary offering which you can go for. But like I said, anywhere you go, you would be expecting anywhere above a 25 lakh base package to start with.
Understood.
Yeah, I think after I left consulting, right, after 12 to 18 months, I heard like across all the consulting firms, the bases got revised upwards. So there is a correction which happens like every few years, which consulting firms will do to ensure the base is moving as per the base is not the same when Shounak joined versus when we joined, right? There is a almost a 20-25% difference. Like it was 20, it was 25 then. I think it underwent a 25% correction almost again after that, right? So the range will be north of 27, 28 for a lot of these consulting firms today.
Yeah, I mean, I think again it's driven a lot by macroeconomics. Like consulting firms will always want the best talent, right? So what they do is say the market is correcting upwards in terms of salaries paid. Your entry level will go up. Your consultant level will also go up, right? So for example, as far as I am aware, I think these days the salary for a consultant is around 30% higher than what it used to be back in 2017. Because what happened is in 2020, 2021, when a lot of companies, including say startups, were aggressively hiring, then there was a larger fight for talent. And I think that's important in terms of factoring in a decision of when to do the MBA as well. So, for example, if you're a fresher, right, you do an MBA, you'll join as a junior consultant in say a Bain. But I remember even in my year, one of my batchmates had 4 years of experience. He joined as a senior associate consultant, one level higher. I think there were also people who joined Bain along with me, who joined from ISB with say 4 or 5 years experience. They joined directly as a consultant. It's like 2 years ahead of where I was when I joined. So, and I think, yeah, I mean, these are decisions, which Shounak said, these are decisions consulting firms are now making because they're more flexible, because what matters to them is getting the best talent.
Understood. Got it. No, I think that answers my question. I now want to switch gears towards consulting. Your like current, so the MBA piece is done now. We want to talk about some of the problem statements that you've worked upon, right? So we know a lot about the day-to-day. What are some of the things you do to solve problems of clients, and but we want to talk about actual problem statements, right? Google wants to expand in Africa. You led the GTM strategy. That can be one example. So I want a very qualitative idea of the kinds of problem statements you worked upon, so that people can get an idea.
Yeah, I'll quickly throw light on the 2-3 where I spent the most amount of time, right, during my time at consulting. I think one was you working for a heavy commercial vehicle client, we were working on a cost reduction project, right? So this client was actually struggling to gain market share, and the primary reason was their vehicles were expensive than what their competitor vehicles were. And we did a diagnostic kind of an exercise for 6 weeks where we benchmarked all their prices, everything, identified the opportunity, and then they hired us for a longer term engagement to actually execute that opportunity and get their costs down. So this was one of the projects I worked on. The other was more for a government arm of India, where we were working on their growth strategy. So they were working on how do I become more self-sufficient, right? So how do I launch more projects and get enough revenue so that I can sustain myself and I'm not dependent on government grants and everything to actually do my daily functioning, right? So fix their finances, also ensure while fixing their finances, they're growing faster than what they are doing today, right? So they can launch a lot more projects, everything, while fixing their monetization strategy, everything. So I think maybe these are the two I can talk about at a very high level, and I think there will be a lot of exciting other projects as well.
Yeah, I think here, so at Bain, there are 2 types of clients that you typically have. One is, say, a private equity or investor group, right? Where the biggest challenge that they face on day to day is, should I make this investment? So you do, that's a due diligence type of project. Or say, I have this asset, what's the best way to make the most return out of it, which is more a sell side project, right? And then the second type of client you have, internally we call it like a general practice, which is, say, a company. Now the challenge they are facing is, say Google wants to expand into Africa, like you said, or say there's a company that wants to streamline its costs a lot. This is the second type of client. The third type of client is something which Bain did not used to actively engage with when I was there, but say in a BCG you get a lot more of those projects, which is government projects.
Understood.
Right, which again, probably not the best time to talk about it, but the kind of projects you hear about is, say, what are the how do you roll out, say, a massive, say, UPI related application, stuff like this is the kind of problem statements that they would be working on. And yeah, I mean, during my time, I think the type of projects were similar. Say there was a cost optimization project that I worked on. There were a lot of growth strategy projects. There was a lot of due diligence and sell side projects that we have done. So due diligence is when there's an asset. Now the client wants to know, is this asset worth investing or not? Is their business model sustainable? Sell side, on the other hand, is there's an asset. Client wants to know what kind of player would be most interested in buying this, and therefore I get the best valuation. These are probably the kind of projects you get.
Understood. Makes sense. Shounak, if you can
Yeah.
talk about some of projects.
Yeah, so I'll just talk about a bit of diversity in the projects which I have personally worked on, right? So I worked in telecommunications in Southeast Asia mostly. The two biggest telecom companies in Singapore and Indonesia. So the projects we did, one was in terms of for Indonesian clients, they used to have a 3-year growth strategy, right? So Kearney had been working with that firm for I think over a decade, and we used to constantly do that, upgrade it. Now the interesting part when I worked on it was that we were focusing on the 4G rollout, right? So there was a big disruptive change from what every year's refresh used to be, right? So that was interesting, and right, and these are things which actually happened on ground. I mean, I remember we launched a co-branded product for the company in Saudi Arabia, and that was actually my first project right out of campus. I went and made some nice looking Excel sheet, etc., and we used to can't debate on the numbers. 6 months later, there was a SIM card for the exact plan. So that was interesting. That was again in Singapore. I think we did a 2-year-long transformation project. I was only involved for a small part of that. It was the entire cost transformation of the company, and I think we know what we are talking about. I think, but yeah, so that was interesting. Then apart from that, then I went into doing some heavy industry work, right? So for a welding company, right? How do you expand your welding solution in industrial welding? That was one. Then for a steel company based out of Eastern India, I did growth strategy and from their coal tar byproducts, right? How can you use it for different kinds of applications, industrial, etc. I remember we were looking at plant setups, etc. in thousands of crores, right? That's what our thing was. That was the second thing. Third, I worked in real estate for 1 year, right? For a Mumbai-based real estate major, right? We set up they are a very owner-driven company, right? And the owner was obviously aging, right? So how do you ensure that the owner moves into a more of an oversight kind of role, and the company operates based on standards, processes, and more delegation, as opposed to what has been happening over the last 20-25 years, because the owner had gone and bought the first land and built a city out of it, right? But that's not how they wanted to operate and scale. They want to professionalize. So setting up the entire processes, etc., all these kind of things which we worked on. And the fourth area I worked a bit in FMCG, right, for some soft drinks manufacturers, trying to help optimize on their sales and distribution margins, channel strategy, etc., right? So this is the breadth of experience I got at Kearney. which is, I mean, I would consider myself to be very lucky, right? Because in the market, at least in our time, the perception was that, if you go to Kearney, you're going to end up doing procurement, right? That's cost optimization. A big chunk of it is actually procuring things better. However, the most of the work, 90% of the work which I did, focused on growth and optimizing on bigger long-term opportunities for specific companies and things which the board would vote on for driving their next set of future top-line initiatives as opposed to often bottom-line initiatives. Right? So that's kind of like the work. But everyone who joins consulting on the very first day, the very first project you join, which is kind of allocated somewhat randomly, your career trajectory can be defined a lot based on what you do there. Because at the end of the day, it's a relationship business even within the firm. So if you go latch on to somebody and they like you, etc., your trajectory can be very well defined by that.
Understood. I think that's a key insight. So next projects we get based on the first project. Let's say in terms of the.
I mean, if you do well and the partner principal has openings, right? They will want to get you in. At the end of the day, everyone wants to work with people who they've worked with, right?
So relationship
consulting is
building
an
also.
internal marketplace
Yeah.
of resources who get allocated and rejected, and not rejected, rolled off. And then again, you have to go find yourself a new opportunity. There is no line manager or things like that who will always you will get work, etc. So you have to do well every project so that you get allocated your next project.
Right.
Yeah, also it is very different from, like as Shounak said, that there is no line manager or anyone, right? You get a mentor assigned who will talk to all the people that you have worked on a project with to get your feedback, collate. But within a span of 9 months, you could have worked with 3 different set of managers, principals, partners, right? So there is no particular person you're tagged to. How it happens is it happens organically, right? As Shounak said, that you work with someone, they like you a lot, they like your work a lot, that you provide a good leverage to the team, everything. They will be more than willing to take you on the next project and the next project, right? So
Understood.
there is no fixed defined trajectory that hey, after every X number of months your project will change, you will move across sectors. It does not necessarily happen for everyone at all the time, right? It is a lot more like internal marketplace, as Shounak said, that you build your own brand within the company.
Right.
People then try to get you on board, everything.
Right. They pick and choose.
Yeah.
Accordingly.
See, there's in every consulting firm, there's an internal role called staffing. So this is basically a team which picks who goes into what project. Most of the input on who I want in my team comes from, say, someone at a partner principal level, right? And so there are 2 things that play out. Firstly, you worked on a project, you've done good work, right? And that partner will usually be working in a certain line of industry, say a consumer packaged goods or say a financial services, right? So yes, what happens is your trajectory to an extent gets defined, right? And now, but you do have a say in the matter. Say, for example, and this would happen in the rest of rare case. Maybe you say that, I've worked for 2 years in consumer packaged goods company related projects, but I want to really also work in private equity. That's where I see myself going, say, after consulting, or maybe that's the type of project which motivates me more, something like that. You do have a say in the matter, right? You might actually be able to convince a staffing or say a partner that take me into this project. That also happens in typical facets of an internal marketplace.
Right.
Both consulting and MBA, there is one aspect which is networking, relationship building, which ends up being a big part of how you make career decisions in the future and what opportunities you get in the future.
Right.
So, and it's all dependent at the end on how you build those relationships, how positively you build relationships with, say, folks within the company.
Understood. And is there also difference in terms of the projects? Bain takes up only these, for example, BCG takes up government projects you mentioned mostly, like let's say more than other firms. And is there any difference in terms of Kearney taking these kinds of projects, Bain taking these kinds of projects, McKinsey working with, let's say, oil companies more? So is there a difference, like a visible difference?
So of course there are different sectors, right? There is, as Sagnik was mentioning, like there is consumer packaged good, there is financial service, like these are different practices within a firm, right? each practice will have its own strength. They have different partners. It is like different business units running within a bigger company, right? And it can be that certain segments of a particular company are a lot more stronger than the other segments, right? For example, for Bain, I think it was always private equity practice is something which Bain is known for, right? Typically, you will see a lot of these players going to Bain.
Right.
As Shounak mentioned, procurement is one thing where Kearney has worked on for such a long time. They have so good frameworks, everything that
Right.
it is now their expertise, right? You talk about procurement and all the framework that Kearney has built over time, like comes up, right? Similarly, BCG has done that with government clients, all of that. So I think that's how it happens. It's if you look at a different business unit and they have their own market share, right? Like
Yeah.
so it's
Understood.
Yeah.
Pharma probably is yes, consulting is there. What about McKinsey? Are they across the board?
In industrial goods is a industry you see associated with McKinsey a lot. Also government. I would say, see, there are two aspects. There are some consulting firms which are, say, more segment focused, or say certain segments are very, very dominant within that firm as compared to other firms. Say, for example, like a government with BCG, at the end of the day, consulting firms are looking to diversify.
Right.
Say, if I'm Bain now, at one point, I think 30-40% projects in Bain were private equity. But say for a Bain as a company, they'd want to diversify, capture more industries, because what if tomorrow private equity firms reduce investments, like what happened in 2023? So see, that is actually the benefit of consulting. See, you're working for a firm which is incentivized, in order to sort of sustain itself, to work with more and more industries, which at the end of the day gives you more opportunities, right? So that's typically what happens. So each firm will have their foothold in one industry for sure, but they'll always look to diversify into more.
Right. No, very, very valuable point, I think.
See, any consulting firm, let's say, unless they're set up for a specific thing, they would want to be everywhere, right? That's their thing, right? So everyone wants to build and branch out. The only difference here, which I think Sagnik has pointed out already, is government business is a bit different in its nature, in the way it is procured, right? Not the aspect of relationship is very, very significant in all sorts of businesses. However, in government, because there is a tendering process, etc., you do end up facing a lot of competition for the likes of Deloitte, etc. Also, it's not that BCG or McKinsey is taking everything. Deloitte, etc. does. I used to do a lot of work in the government sector, which you would probably not see that much in other kinds of spaces. You're competing, right? For example, I was talking about the firm in Indonesia where I have been working, where Kearney has been working for 10 years. McKinsey has also been working for 10 years, right? Okay. I mean, they had a cafeteria. We often used to have lunch sitting across the table, right? So, but yeah, they are working in a certain part of that business. They hold that relationship. We are working in a part of the business, hold the relationship. The business keeps going because you have been doing good work, etc. But when you come to the government business, they essentially have to tender out, and there is a process of, cost becomes a very big aspect along with your technical capability, and there's a proper scoring which has to happen. So that's why government business, there could be a barrier to entry as opposed to, and hence certain firms could be very focused and very successful in those line of businesses. Having said that, even in Kearney, they were trying to make attempts to enter the thing, and they had made certain investments in the space, as well. I think in the Bharatmala, etc. projects back then, right? But I don't know how successful they were. But at the end of the day, every consulting firm wants to be everywhere.
Yeah, no, I think Kearney has now ventured, but as Shounak was mentioning, like, for example, government tenders or projects will have that you need at least X years of experience working on so many projects. Right?
Okay.
Now that becomes a cold start problem. You don't have that experience, so you cannot meet those criteria and hence be eligible even for the bidding process. Right? So I think some firms who have been doing it for a longer period of time tend to get those kind of projects a lot more. I think Kearney lately they have figured out a lot of projects in government space, have been working. I think few which Shounak mentioned. I think with that they have also now ventured. So
yeah. Also, another thing, if we are talking about the thing, it is also global staffing, right? It's not so. The biggest, most valuable projects in terms of monetary value actually comes from the Middle East,
Okay.
At least, right, where there are a lot more dependent, especially on the government space to implement these kind of things. So why I was talking about this is that you are trying to import experts, etc., from these domains, etc. That's how you try to solve this cold start kind of problem in this space, right? But yeah, that's more or less what.
No, you mentioned a bunch of these countries as well, right? So I'm guessing there must have been a lot of traveling in terms of, let's say, you're traveling every other week to some other country, let's say, or let's say every month. So what's the kind of, can you touch more upon, maybe cover more about the travel bit? How many countries have you visited, or how frequent was the travel? Like, if you can touch
Okay.
on that.
So yeah, so it was not very frequent in terms of changing countries, right? So when I'm, let's say, working in Indonesia, I'm only working in Indonesia, right? So a normal schedule used to be that I used to fly out, let's say a Sunday night, start working on Monday in Indonesia, Jakarta mostly. Because it's an international thing, it takes about 8-10 hours of travel. I would not travel back every week, right? Every alternate week on Thursday, I would fly back, spend the weekend in India, Mumbai, and then again go back. And that is a luxury I could afford because I was 24, 25. I did not have many family commitments, but people otherwise have. But in general, let's say I have spent 6, 8, 9 months, and actually in 1 year, I did about 200 plus nights in Ritz-Carlton, Jakarta, right, in the same room. So that's how it used to be. So traveling used to be less, staying in the hotel used to be massive. In India, if you do, you travel almost every week, right? You fly in on Monday and you fly out on Thursday, Friday, etc. Right? But after COVID, I am made to believe that things have changed and people are more okay with remote work and not being on the client side 24/7. Pre-COVID, it used to be a complete requirement that if you're not there, you're practically not working, right? That is not the thing. But when you're traveling, let's say if you're working in Singapore or Indonesia, etc., you're traveling to that location itself and you're staying there. It's not that you're staying there for at least a couple of weeks. If you go to Europe and North America, it could even be 3 weeks to a month. It's just that the travel time is so long and so tiring with jet lag, everything. Very frequent traveling can actually be it can be an impediment to your performance, right? As opposed to.
Right.
So at the end of the day, consulting is a client-facing role, right? You have to go where the client is. So in my case, for example, majority of my cases are India-based, right? So you used to go fly out on a Monday 5 a.m. You used to fly back on a Thursday night. And say Friday was you could spend in office, but you could choose to spend it at the client location as well, depending on your requirement. But you spend 80% of your time is spent with the client, right? For example, when we did so there was this one international case I did, which was in China, right? Now it was 2 weeks at a time travel. So fly out on a Monday, spend entire week. The next week on a Friday evening is when we would fly back, right? And then we spend say 1 week in India and then fly back again, right? So the thing here is if you're not spending 70% of your time with the client, right? The purpose isn't solved because they need someone to be, hands-on with them, understand their problem statements, work with them, build the solutions, whether it be a strategy or say a cost optimization, whatever it is. So so that is how the travel plays out, and yeah, I mean, like at a young age, it's relatively easier to do. In fact, it's fascinating. You get to see a new location every day. You get to say stay at an upscale hotel. In China, there's this in Shanghai, there's this hotel where every time I used to go, they used to recognize, okay, this guy is here, give him this room on this floor, and all of that. They used to have the room allocated for us beforehand. So so that's the intensity of travel which happens. It's just also, yeah, I mean, a point came that with the impact of COVID, so the remote work became the norm. But what happened also is that between COVID, when a requirement was there, I've heard that there were teams who used to work maybe 2 months out of a client location at a time because you couldn't travel very frequently, right? You didn't want to risk the team's health, but you could be based there for say a 2-month period in a relatively say protected, sanitized environment.
Mhm.
So so that is just the importance that it plays on being in front of the client at all points.
Right. And clients have also become probably more comfortable working online. And if you are probably in meetings, virtual meetings with them, does that also work? Like,
See, okay, so I was at Bain for part of the COVID period. Again, I had exited in 2020. But to be honest, remote work was something that clients had to accept for a period of time.
right.
After that, some clients might have gotten used to it and all of that, and it would have been better, you save on the travel bills and all. But see, majority of companies after that have reverted to a work from office model because interpersonal interaction, working together is always going to be more productive. You'll build better relationships, and clients also want that. So that is how I imagine it would have trended.
Understood.
I think I have a couple of my friends who are still in consulting. I think it has returned back to normalcy, I would say. Like,
Okay.
because clients have also started going back to office. Travel is now as safe as it was pre-COVID, right? So everything has gone back to normalcy. So even clients are now expecting that, considering these are typically short-term projects, high-impact projects, clients also are investing a lot of, say, financial resources, their own resources, everything into it. So they want that
Of
at
course,
least
they're
people
paying,
around
they're
ground.
paying you terms of money.
Yeah. Also, one thing which I feel like while routine travel is typically this, I think there is a lot of ad hoc travel as well, right? So, for example, you will realize that today evening you're getting a call that hey, tomorrow morning we need to leave for XYZ location where the client has some plant which you need to visit and go and monitor for a day or 2 day. Next day you have to visit some other warehouse, right? So, at times you will also find a lot of ad hoc travel, right? So, you have reached the client side, but now client has its base across the footprint across India, right? They might want to visit a warehouse, want to visit a plant, some manufacturing facility, right? So there will be a lot of ad hoc travel that at times client might say that hey, you go tomorrow and visit it and get back with the findings, right? And you will have everything emergency travel desk to your rescue.
Insightful point, I think. Ad hoc sometimes, and also depends on the client's own, like, let's say, fantasies or whatever the client desires or wants you to look at.
See, in a consulting role, you're typically working with a CXO level. Like when I say working with, I mean that's your key stakeholder, right? Now, what used to happen very often, especially in cases which were very much focused on say implementing the solutions as well, not just the making the strategies. That say you will have a meeting and say someone will say that this is something which I'm not very clear on. Should travel to this location, figure it out, work with the ground stakeholders, and come back with a clearer answer. And like like Swapnil mentioned, it happens within a course of a day because the client has invested say 2 months into you.
Yeah.
Wants a great answer in 2 months, right? So there's no space for say delays. If we decide that we're going to look into something today, the work has to start tomorrow. That's the way it happens.
Understood. Got it. No, I think we have a fair bit of an idea of the kind of work that goes into this, that's there in this role. Any particularly funny situation or an embarrassing moment probably or a mishap during your time in consulting that makes you want to sort of cringe or laugh, right? Either, so for example, those 200 nights in Ritz-Carlton in Jakarta is a particularly amusing situation. And I'm guessing probably 60-70 nights would have been in other places. So at your home, you would have probably spent only 60-70 nights in a year, right? Or probably even less. So any particularly funny situation that you recall? Anyone can take this
At
out.
least.
No, I mean, go ahead.
No, Shounak, mine was
I'm sure there'll be a
slightly-
lot of...
It was more of a mishap rather than a cringe or an embarrassing story. So I think, yeah, Shounak, maybe you can first start.
So I think one advantage of consulting is that since you're working with so many different kinds of companies, right? So when we start working with these companies, if you have prior experience, that's good. In my case, it was the first company I was working with. I've interned in some, Texas Instruments, etc. So very MNC, proper process-oriented company. Then I joined Kearney, which is also very professional and process-driven, etc. But when you go and work in some of these companies, you will see a lot of variety in the within the Indian spectrum also and abroad as well, right? In how the role of the promoter, and the importance of the promoter for anything an organization does sometimes, right? We expect from our business books, etc. We have read these courses where people talk about reducing span, delegation, professional communication, etc. Measurability. A lot of these things you get to see that the culture is very different, and you have to adapt yourself to that culture. I'll just give a very funny anecdote or incident which happened when I was working at one of these firms. It was based in Bombay for the firm, right? So it was still a promoter. The promoter was the executive chairman, etc., and he was running the firm. There was obviously a professional management in place, but on the promoter's birthday, right? Everyone in the organization, this is the headquarters, right? They had to all gather together in a field, okay, where the promoter was standing, and everyone, starting from senior management to the lowest level employee, etc., had to sing a song, right, praising the promoter. It's a very successful company in India, right? All of us have consumed its products, right? But it was a scenario I would have never imagined could happen in a professional environment when we are singing a song which effectively, to kind of summarize, would say that you're great, your achievements are great, things like that. And they do it every year, right? So I don't know whether it's funny, weird, etc. It's just a very eye-opening kind of perspective on how businesses can sometimes work and how that culture, because everyone was doing it willingly and it's not something that people found it, a bit out of place also. So how that culture, which some of us maybe coming out of MBA schools would be like, yeah, really, do we want to go and work in a firm like that where the promoter is so predominant and this thing, but there are thousands of people work in that firm and they find it perfectly normal. So the diversity which you get to see working at different companies is very unique, and let's say we are brought up with this MNC culture कि ऐसे होना चाहिए. Most of the cases ऐसे नहीं होता है, especially if you work in Indian companies, right? So that is the reality you get to see, and this anecdote kind of emphasizes that reality a bit, to say that I'm sure not many companies do this also, but that's the kind of flavor you get to see when you work in consulting.
Were you also made to sing?
No, we were standing on the sidelines.
Right.
We were asked to participate, but yeah, we were given a note, right, with the song, so you could chime in, but yeah.
Understood. Right. What about you guys? Any particular?
The other thing was a mishap, right? Like communication is very critical in these fast-paced environment and even within your team, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the projects, initial weeks of the project, I spent now 12-18 months into consulting. Right now,
Okay.
I have joined a new project, and my principal called me and said that, hey, we need to prepare for a presentation at 5 p.m. and this call happens at 12 noon, right? That we need to be prepared for this, and you will need to pull out some more, like you need to build certain Excel models just for this use case, try 2 to 3 different simulations, and whatever results we have, we will have to present it, right? Now in this entire thing, I did not clarify a few things, right? And it's a very short span of time. I did not clarify that, hey, when do you want to review it? 5 p.m. is a meeting with the chairman, right? And the principal might also have certain meetings in between. I did not clarify some of those, and I went, had lunch, came back, I realized it will take only 1.5 hours just for me to simulate, and another 1 hour to make a deck out of it, right? So as like I am in time, I'll be ready by 4:30. At 3 p.m. my principal comes in, he's like, where is the deck? I'm like, analysis is ready, deck is something I'm going to start on. He's like, hey, I have to go meet, I have 3 other meetings, right? I don't have time and we need to be ready by now. And then the good thing is that you have a team, the entire team chimed in and helped churn out that deck in 15 minutes. The fastest I have seen a chairman level deck getting churned out, like there are 10 slides to be made, 3 each got divided and conquered. But yeah, that day I realized that even after spending 12-18 months, it is still important to be on top of your communication gap, communication game, keep on clarifying things, being very clear in terms of, because it is very tight and
super interesting.
Yeah.
And I think one incident that happened with me now, and this tells you about how the practical nature of running a business is how important it is rather than say just the strategic part of it. There's a news that came out that say that the company that we are working for, their core product, the taxation is going to increase.
Okay.
Right, and basically there was almost 2 days of work that on the basis of that, how will the biggest competitor change their pricing? How should we change our pricing? What are the various scenarios that could happen? Say tax goes up, they don't change. What will be the impact on the P&L? All that stuff. I mean, I would say 2 days of work, endless 2 a.m., 3 a.m. went into making these 4 scenarios on like a very, very detailed Excel, all that. We go into the meeting with the founder, right? Say, absolutely ready to present everything, like we're on top of everything, we've thought out every scenario. The first question he asks is, have you spoken to the competitor? And the second question he asks is, have you spoken to someone in the government?
Okay.
Nobody had.
Right.
Which just tells you, see, the thing is, the way we learned in our MBA time, the way we also learned in the initial years of working is, everything is a problem to be solved on paper. Most business problems are actually very practical in nature, right? Which is around finding out more information, finding out how your competitor is going to react, right? Stuff like that. And it's better done on a call. Like the answers on a call that come out are usually much richer than the answers that come out on paper. This was a funny incident that happened. I think our manager felt so bad, he gave us a compensatory leave.
Okay.
Saying that I made you work for say 2 days till 3 a.m. for something which did not bear much fruit, so take a compensatory leave.
Right.
But I mean, I remember that incident in both a funny way and also a learning way.
Yeah. Very valuable. I think very interesting incidents. What did you like most about your time in consulting broadly? Like if there's one thing, right? And then we'll also talk about the cons maybe, but then maybe if there's one thing that you did like the most.
I really enjoyed the exposure, right? And
Exposure to multiple industries?
exposure to even the CXO level, right? Like
Right.
your counterpart is CXO, right? For me, if I joined that company after my undergrad,
Right.
for me to interact with that CXO on a daily basis, it might take even 10 years, right?
Right.
Considering how those companies work, right? I was a fresher, went did an MBA, came out of MBA experience. Within 3 months of me coming out, I'm sitting right across the table with the CXO. And even if you are not leading that discussion, at times you are also got to lead the discussion, but maybe first few, as Sagnik was also mentioning, that you also spend some time getting more comfortable with the room, trying to understand the client, how to present, what to present, right? But understanding those kind of insight, and being in that room where a CXO asks a question, hey, have you spoken to a competitor or have you spoken to the government, shapes your mental model a lot more, right? Like this kind of exposure, it is very hard to get typically if you grow within a company, which consulting gives you. I think I remember one of the first presentations I did was directly to the CEO of that business, right? And he was actually going through those ideas. We had a lot of cost-efficient ideas. Hey, how did you think of this? How are they doing it? Defending those questions. Even, of course, there were principal partners in the room to act like a safety net. But like this is something I don't think so. If I would have taken any other path, like would have at least taken 4 to 5 years for me to make that happen.
I think very, very fortunate. But
I have to agree. I mean, honestly, there's a lot of things I liked about consulting, a lot of things I did not like about consulting. If I have to choose one thing I love the most, it's this, it's the exposure. See, very few roles will teach you how to think. They teach you how to do a certain activity. In consulting, you'll learn how to think because you'll sit in a boardroom with a CXO, with a founder, you'll hear the questions they ask, you'll listen to the decisions they make and how they go about it. At the same time, you will work with very ground level stakeholders, you will understand their challenges, you will understand what they do on a day to day. So you will see a company most often in its full breadth, and right. If you do certain cases, you will see an industry in its entire width and breadth, right? So that kind of exposure, I don't think any role gives you when you're fresh out of college.
how about you, Shounak?
Yeah, so I think, not emphasizing more on the exposure point because that is how it is pitched to candidates and anyone works for the exposure. I think in hindsight, after I've left consulting, I think my biggest, enjoyable factor beyond this exposure, etc., was that at the end of the day, we are working in a firm which has in general the level of capability of people is very high, right? So when we step out, yes, we have worked with clients where obviously, right, you cannot have a consulting firms are small at the end of the day, correct? Very small compared to industry. So they are different. But when you work in an environment where there are various degrees of capability of the people, right? So there are certain challenges. Yes, you have to mold yourself to those challenges, etc., and try to get the work done. But in consulting, since this it's a very structured program whenever you join, it's a very structured program. It has to be standardized because people, like we've discussed, people move from one project to the other. So any new manager has to have an understanding or a basic expectation of what you can do, right? It's not that, okay, I will come and learn what this person can do, right? So in general, the basic quality of the people is or capabilities are very high, right? As happens with multiple leading organizations, and that I think beyond the exposure was something which was very interesting, and they help you, they push you. There is some healthy competition also, right? Right. So all of that kind of makes it a very interesting exposure, interesting experience.
Understood. And what's one, I'll not call it a con, but what is one misconception? Initially, you had an image that, okay, this is what consulting looks like. Then, sort of over the 2-3 years you worked in consulting, that sort of got revised, right? What's that one misconception? And you can always talk about a con, maybe, overall.
I used to think consulting is all about one endless case study interview where you solve problems. Realized over time, consulting is more about convincing someone. Most of your time goes into building trust, building relationship, building a sort of belief in another person that whatever you say, you are someone who maybe worked for 2 months in their industry. But you have to build a trust in a CXO who might have worked for 10 years that what you say has value or what you're communicating has value. I think that is one aspect that you don't realize when you're, say, prepping for a typical, say, consulting interview or before you go into consulting. But that's actually the majority, the most difficult problem statement to solve.
Right.
Yeah, just an extension of what Sagnik said, right? Like, when you prepare for consulting interview, you think that, hey, there is a broader problem statement, a guesstimate exercise or a structural exercise. But for majority of these projects, right, some of this will take only 2 days, 3 days for a team to do, right? Now what happens is the problem gets broken down into smaller problem statement and you have been assigned one piece of it, right? So you do not day in, day out break down problem statement, a very high level problem statement into smaller bits, right? That happens at the beginning of a project, then you get assigned that piece. And now within that piece, you start chipping it down and you own that complete piece. You work with different stakeholders, right? So for example, whenever an execution project comes up or even a different nature of project, you'll have to don multiple hats, right? It's not just a problem solver. You will have to go on ground, understand, you will have to do competition benchmarking, you will have to interview experts, figure out the right answer, right? So you will have to, for that piece that you own, you have to do everything possible as a business owner or that problem statement. That as a business owner, whatever you would have done to make it happen, like you do all of that.
There's some execution, there's some grunt work also, there's some field work. It's not only strategy and breaking down problem statements. It's a lot more than that. Convincing, I think, is also a very important part since you're managing stakeholders.
Yeah.
What do you think, Shounak?
Yeah, so I believe your question is misconception, right, or cons? Which one?
No, I think, yeah, so there are two questions. We can either talk about a misconception or a con, right? You can also talk about
So I think, one of the biggest things, right? So when we are out of college, etc., or we join, right, we want to create impact, right? Now, creating tangible impact takes a lot of time, right? But what happens is that it depends. If you have an execution arm to your project, maybe you're there. But a lot of times, you've done a project, you've handed over, right? And the execution or the implementation or the decision making comes to the business, right? So they could lead to a moment of disillusionment that, I have worked very hard hours, right? Very often that you would have practically killed yourself working. and you've submitted a PowerPoint report, right, which does not see the light of day on the ground, or maybe it's happening, but you don't see the impact maybe 1 to 3 years down the line, right? So you could end up questioning that, have I just created a fancy PowerPoint and given like we said, right, convinced people, but what did this convincing lead to actually on ground, right? It takes time. Sometimes it will not happen, and that's the nature of business also, right? Not every business strategy which you make will be implemented, right? So that can sometimes make you question, am I creating impact, right? That's one. Second thing which I think is that in the way it is shown in, even when consulting is pitched to you by companies, right? It's only sector in which comes to campuses which takes you for some multiple dinners, right? No other company, sector, etc. does it, and that's part of the building of the impression, right? So we will have a lot of people coming to campus, and they will be invited to a 5-star hotel or a very fancy hotel for a dinner, right? They will be given additional emphasis during the process, right? You will have a buddy talking to you, etc., solving all your problems. And saying it's a good process, but it's the only sector which practically does it. A bit of banking does it. So there is an attempt to build glamour around that the profession also, right? The glamour can disappear very fast, right? Even though you're in the glamour, it can disappear very fast, and you will be left with a lot of long, hard nights when you will be basically cursing what you're doing, right? Even at the end of the day, it's a very successful project after 6 months, and you really love working with the client and the team. There will be multiple instances in the middle, you're going to be questioning what you're doing at 3 a.m. when you're going back home, right? Or when you're missing certain things your friends are doing, right? So it is to be very clear that that is what you're signing up for, right? It's not a work-life balance industry, right? It gives you the glamour, etc., because it is going to make you work this hard, and they want you to stay in the client side and the hotels and all the comfort, because you're going to be expected to do this in return. Some projects are better, certainly, but everyone who has done consulting, I'm sure, has gone through this grind once, at least when 3-4 months they were working at least 14 to 15 hours every day. And today, because of our lifestyle, it's not only sacrificing on your work-life balance, it has impact on people's health, right? A lot of back issues, etc. It is an impact which will last even beyond you might leave consulting. So you should be very clear that these are the things you are signing up for sometimes.
Thanks a lot for bringing that out. I think reality check is important. People, and this directly ties back to the goal of this podcast, right? We want people to be very, very informed, right? The actual realities of the role they take up, right? Now, just before switching gears to growth, right? I just want to talk about some exit paths and why are people leaving, right? Or why do people leave, let's say, after X years? So why do people leave? Let's talk about that first, then we'll talk about exit paths. So what's the average, first of all, duration? What we were discussing earlier, like
There are different phases, right? And I think maybe Sagnik, you add some numbers, you can.
This is a number I heard quoted during my time of law, that in the first 2 years, typically 70% of any incoming batch will exit.
Okay. 2
Right.
years, 70%.
Yeah, which means like and within Bain at least, I remember when I joined, the year I joined was the first time someone became a partner at Bain who had joined as an associate consultant.
Okay.
Right?
Others were later hires.
Yeah.
Understood.
So what that tells you is tenures are typically, like, longer tenures are rare.
Right.
And it also tells you that the attrition is very high in the initial years.
Understood.
And that is how it is all structured, right? You have every year you have 15-20 people getting hired from one campus, 3 campus, you have 45 people getting hired, but eventually you see that year only 2 people would have become partner or principal, that level, right? So you know that not everyone who is getting hired, out of that only 4 or 5% might eventually stay in the longer run, right? To actually take those principal partner tracks. So a smaller percentage of the batch is actually left to take these paths. Also has to do with how the macroeconomic scenario has, to be very honest, right? I think 2021, around that time, a lot of investment in startup space was there. So at that time, we saw a lot of churn, right? Like this ratio was even higher during that time. But if you look at 2023, when the macroeconomic scenario was not as great, right? Companies were not hiring as much or were not offering as high packages, right? At least the startups and other industry. That is when you will see that people sticking in consulting for a slightly longer period of time. So that also has a role to play. But typically people are always on the, like a bit chunk is on the lookout after spending 2 years or something, right? Once they have gained certain degree of exposure within consulting into these spaces. The primary reason I feel is, of course, you get to see a lot of consulting in first 2 years. You get all that you were looking for, right? In terms of exposure, different sectors, problem statement, everything you get to experience in those 2 years. After that, you have to take a call, right? Because it becomes a lot more of a role where you have to build credibility with client, now venture into a role where you now have to sell projects, right? Over a longer period of time. Do you see that doing for a longer period of time, or do you weigh the cons that we were discussing, right? For example, not being able to see impact in longer period of time, questioning those things. If you prioritize these things, you will tend to venture out and do something.
In your first day at consulting, there will be an orientation. So there's typically a week-long orientation on the very first day. There will be one session where someone will mention a term called up or out.
Okay.
So this is a very popular term that I think every consulting firm uses internally. The consulting firms also, in a way, they do want to create a situation where they retain the best folks, because say every level you go up, say you become a consultant, you have to be in that role of creating conviction for a CXO. You become a manager, you have to be in a role where you say create a situation where someone keeps giving you more projects, right? So since it's a level up at every stage, consulting firms also would want a situation where someone who's say can't level up to that extent, makes a conscious decision to also exit. So that that does drive a certain level of attrition in and of itself. And then what Shounak mentioned, it's a difficult lifestyle. It's an industry where a 1 a.m. 2 a.m. is not unheard of. Right? Your client might be leaving at say an 8 p.m. and you're sticking around say for another 4-5 hours because you have to deliver the deck the next day. Right? So and so it's a lifestyle which once you spend say 1-2 years in it, a lot of people realize it's not for them, and that's absolutely fair, right? So they make a conscious decision to leave. This is what drives typically a lower average tenure in consulting.
Understood. So people who go on to become partners, they find themselves fit better in this kind of a culture and this hustle, and they probably enjoy working. That's my take. What do you think? Yeah.
Typically they'll start enjoying their sector. They would have forged relationship with clients, right, which they start valuing. Right? So
understood.
But I think Shounak, a lot of your batchmates would be on the track of already being principals and partners.
No, they are already partners and managing directors.
That is what I'm saying. So I think you'll be able to answer better. So what makes them stay?
So I think in terms of external opportunities, I'll just give a bit of it has changed, and it also depends on when you are exiting, right? So 2 years, you have a lot of options, right? So earlier what used to happen is the only option which main people had leaving consulting was to go join either a more relaxed consulting firm, right? Or go to the industry per se, right? At that point of time, this Amazon wave and Myntra wave, etc. did not happen. So people went with the understanding that you're going to take a slight pay cut, right? Or maybe not a hike, and then you're going to enjoy a better lifestyle. And then as the macroeconomic environment we're talking about, people started going into different kinds of startups, right? So every startup which I've seen, which is in the initial phase while they're setting up, they do hire a lot of consultants. And once things get set up a bit, then they get industry experts, right? So for example, in Amazon, what I've seen is they hired a lot of consultants start with, and then they started going with, FMCG guys, etc. But at the end of the day, it's setting up supply chains and selling to people. So that was kind of the sweet spot for people to exit. There is a lot of people now who leave and try to do their own thing also, right? A lot of my batchmates, they were part of the initial group who set up Swiggy. Obviously, Swiggy is set up by Majeti, but
Yeah.
the initial kind of people, and they have stayed and gone on to become heads of certain divisions, even CEOs of certain internal group companies. So that at that point of time, they were not really joining a startup. They were joining a startup, but not doing a job. They're literally taking a bet on that new idea, right? So that's the kind of breadth in exposure which people have started getting. As you go to senior position, and I'll talk about a specific person I've seen, they went from, they were a partner in Kearney, they went, joined Byju's, right, headed the tuition division. Now Byju's going through a bad time. They've gone back to heading in consulting, etc., right? So even in the senior positions at your going to a CXO office or a strategic division, etc., could be thing. Another example I can think of is a person in my company only. He left, went to Zomato. He became a co-founder, got the IPO done, and then he left. Right. So these kind of options have been possible now is possible across all spectrum. So like Swapnil and Sagnik in this room, they have joined at a relatively junior level in the consulting hierarchy, and they are probably going and leading certain teams, etc. At a senior level, you can go and join at a CXO level, etc. also today, where people value the consulting experience. I think the biggest advantage is that the consulting, you're able to deal with ambiguity and chaos, right? Because every start of a consulting project looks like that, where everyone is scrambling, to either understand the company, the industry, understand the culture, the people, understand each other, right? So I think that's certainly what people value and bring on as part of your thing.
Honestly, between like 2015 to somewhere say 2022, and I would say that probably the last year might be an outlier as well. In that is the period where honestly the best type of exit opportunities have come across the width and breadth of consulting. Say someone who's say exiting say after 2-3 years, right? For them there are a lot of opportunities in the startup space. You come and solve a problem which literally say nobody in that company would know how to solve, right? And that's literally the kind of thing you do as a consultant, because you go into a project, most of your team would not know anything about that industry, right? So you have to figure things out from scratch. That's exactly the type of skill set that emerging companies also need.
Right.
And so, for example, even I have seen exits at say someone at a partner level joining, a company as a CEO, right, or a chief operating officer. These things have now become very possible because of the macro situation in the country in general. Like there's a lot of startups coming up, expanding. I saw a report the other day saying that, say, if you exclude the startups, our company would actually be negative GDP growth. Right. So that's
Actually, Ropar mentioned that.
That's correct. Yeah. That's correct. So that's the kind of scale that emerging companies in India are creating, and they need people to obviously make those things work for them, set up their processes, and so that's the kind of opportunity which has come up in the recent decade.
Right. Yeah. No, India has definitely gone through a very transformational period, which is why startup opportunities are like in huge numbers. So let's say there are 100 people exiting today. You are saying how many would, let's say, enter a startup? Let's say after 2 years, 100 people exit. How many are entering the startups? I just want to get the split. How many are going into PE, VC, or other spaces, or sales, marketing? Maybe if you can help me with that. Collectively, like this is. So I believe that.
I think startup is a very generic term, right? Because within startup, you can do multiple kind of roles. Right? You can do growth roles, you can do marketing roles, you can do a lot of those roles. But at least my understanding is out of this 100, almost 70-75 odd percentage would go to say new companies, or even like maybe established companies, or say companies which are growing, right, early part of their journey, but maybe you classify them into the startup bucket.
Yeah.
PE, VCs, all of those, I think 5% or 5 to 10% of all the exits I feel would be in that, and rest is I think the strategy wings of the conglomerates and some of those, right?
Right. FMCG you mentioned. Right.
And this is the correct
Actually-
time, but feel free to add. I think this is my understanding.
Even one more role which is becoming more prominent in the conglomerates is something called internal consulting, right?
Okay.
So they don't essentially take you as a strategy, but they'll take you in internal consulting. You'll work across multiple divisions. Like TSMG is one very straightforward example of people exiting, and then post that they move on to, after a couple of years, they might move on to Tata Motors, etc., and a more direct operational role or a direct business role as well. That also I think I see as a very prominent thing. Even Siemens, etc., they are giving good opportunities. But I mean, I don't really have any handle on the numbers and splits, right? And I don't have any handle on that.
Yeah, just a general sense. I think 15-20% would probably move to conglomerates. 70% close to 70 would be moving to startups and growing companies. Probably about 5-10% in PE, VC and other.
Even the 70 to 75, there's a split, to be honest. There's an early stage startup and a late stage startup. Most of them end up going to a late stage startup. But I think early stage startup is like, it would be maybe 20% of this, like 20% of 75. That's what that number would be.
Yeah, I think early stage and people starting up on their own as well, like a lot of
Is
both.
yeah. So probably within 70-75, 10% would be early stage versus let's say 90% would be close to would be the later stage startups. Meesho and Unacademy being very good examples of that.
Correct.
And you figure in the 10% bucket. So I think this question is to you, Shounak. Why did you first of all leave Consult and why did you start up? So what's that transition look like? Why did you transition from Consult to startup?
Yeah. So in general, for the first 3 years of my consulting experience, I used to be like, we are doing great, adding a lot of value, great projects, etc. And then I got a very like bad 6 months of projects, etc. So that was what kind of first made me want to look out, right? And then, but post that I was kind of okay continuing as well. I did look out for some opportunities, but nothing was very exciting, which people blame that I didn't do a very sincere job. There's a lot of exciting things out there, but anyway, that happened. But then in the meanwhile, what I had also seen as part of my working experience was that there's so much data, right? And in consulting, we were just dealing with tons and tons of data and Excel sheets and things like that. And we are always scraping, my data is crashing, and we're doing the same analysis over and over again also at our place as well as in the organization which we work with, right? So Excel and PowerPoint is like your go-to and only tool practically when you look at consulting, right? And
is that the same? Is that the same for you also?
Yeah.
They will have few fancy dashboard, like to build certain
Power
dashboard
BI.
for the client, Power BI and all. But like for analytical to get insights, these are the.
You mentioned
Yeah.
modeling also. Excel only, okay, that is. Yeah. Sorry.
So today they have some specific people who do, I mean, there are companies now which McKinsey, BCG, even Kearney, they are buying analytics companies, like Quantum Black is a company, but it's not the role which you go for.
Right.
It's a separate division altogether, etc. So back in that time, there was nothing like that. And when I was in undergrad, right, I knew Python and things like that, and we could do these things so much faster and so much efficiently that I kind of started seeing an opportunity in terms of trying to, help these companies make more sense of their data per se, right? And we saw that there are opportunities to do that. So that's what I was kind of thinking about, not very proactively, until I met some people who were also kind of looking at similar things, and that's when I thought, maybe it was young age, etc. Naively, I said, okay, let me leave a job and figure it out, what happens, right? And that's how I started doing it. So basically, 1.5 years in the middle, we were trying out different things, etc. And then in 2019, I kind of set up this company, which is probably not the best time because within 6 months, everything was shut.
Yeah.
Right. So, but since before that, we had some clients, etc. So we had the work going, and so we never ran out of money, and we never raised any money. right? So we kept going with that itself, and yeah, that's it. So the main objective was to help companies. So my only experience personally is consulting, and what I do today is also consulting, but not the consulting which we talk about, right? So it is consulting when you consult somebody, right? So right now, consulting people on how to use AI, specifically even more generative AI, to make their businesses more efficient or find new use cases, etc., which people did not even think about. And not only by consulting, I'm also telling you that I'll build it for you and help you use it, right? So that's what the way to think about it is, and that's broadly the technology which we are using has changed, right? When I started, it was AI, then everyone went crazy about deep learning and things like that, and now this thing. So it will keep changing and evolving as new things come about, but adopting that and implementing in a business process is what the focus is on, right? So, and to be I mean, if I punctuate, there was no like light bulb moment I woke up to one day in consulting, right? It did not happen like that. Every day, some minor brightness is increasing, but overall, that's the evolving process.
Right. So that build-up happened over some time, and that's
Over
the
some
new.
time, and it's still happening. We are figuring every few years we want to kind of build more streams and businesses in which we want to do, and yeah, maybe we will raise some funds going forward to accelerate the pace at which we are going.
Understood.
But the sector Shounak is working in is probably the most exciting one as of today.
Definitely.
As of today, yes, but you know, like 3 years back, people were like pouring in money into edtech. Now people are very so it's a very transient thing.
Yeah.
But the good thing is actually the real growth and strength happens in downtimes. Right? That's when you really focus on your business. Right? When there is, so for example, during COVID, right? Even in the industry, tech went through a boom because all of a sudden everyone wanted to be in digital because they could not sell any other way. So you basically were going left, right, center to buy growth at quite unaffordable, even for the biggest of companies, at sometimes unaffordable prices, right? And that's why you see so many layoffs, etc. One is obviously people do not need that many people anymore because that was second, also the salary structure, cost structure, etc. has become so unsustainable, right? So neither can you move them up. It's a silent up or out. Let's say this way. In consulting, people want to say, up or out, we maintain quality, etc. In bigger companies, you cannot really do that. So it's more silent in the way they are going about it.
Understood. You talked about why you transitioned from consulting to, let's say, entrepreneurship. But how about you? What led you to growth strategy, or let's say wherever you are now? Why did you leave consulting? Why did you join growth strategy? Maybe if you can start something.
Sure. So see, there's a bit of chance involved, and there's some conscious decision making involved here. Back in 2020, at that time, what was happening, if you look at it, was that investments were entirely going into startups. Like there was a lot of investments happening, a lot of opportunities happening, right? But at the same time, what was happening, say, with me in my consulting role, there was that one period where cases, projects were changing. There was a lot, right? And I was sort of starting to question that whether this is really something that is motivating me as of now. See, what happens is when you make the decision to leave, it is driven by few things. It's obviously driven a lot by how things are going for you within the company, but also a lot of times it is driven by a fascination, or say with a conscious interest on, is there something out there which would give me more ROI for the time and effort I put in? And I don't mean monetary, I mean more than that, right? So I think at that time there are a lot of interesting things happening in consumer tech. I had the opportunity to work with a consumer tech client as well at Bain, and I think it was pretty fascinating the way they were sort of scaling themselves, right? And I felt that this is a kind of problem statement which I would love to work on day in and day out, and that sort of contributed to my decision to make the leap. And I think at at that time, now why edtech and why growth is more a function of what was required at that time in the industry, what kind of profiles were more prevalent, right? At that time, every company was on a growth trajectory,
Right.
and they needed people to come in, figure out what are the growth opportunities, set up internal teams and systems to help them tap into those.
Yeah.
So I honestly, that was more a driver of my decision to go behind a growth role at Unacademy. Right now, actually, so about 4 or 5 months ago, I transitioned from a very almost 3 years of growth related opportunity roles to a more operations and optimization role, because that's what's more important within the company right now. That's the A plus problem statement to solve.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I mean, what will drive your decision to leave, or what drove my decision to leave was more chance and what's happening externally and my frame of mind where I was at that time. But where I went into is honestly entirely almost entirely a equation of what everyone was hiring for and what, say, industries and companies at that time needed.
Right. So it's a function of interest and opportunity, right? Is my understanding, and of obviously the macroeconomics.
Yeah, yeah.
What about you, Swapnil?
I think pretty similar, but one of the cons that we were discussing, right, which I think Shounak also pointed out, that are you creating enough impact, right? You tend to question this a lot, and I think same thing was happening with me for some time, that hey, we are doing something, like have been doing a lot of things for the client for the last 2 years, but
Direct impact.
yeah, the direct impact was difficult to, at least for me to realize, right? That even that feedback loop was not immediate, right? In startup, you do something, you can do something immediately the next day, you start executing it, all moves at a very fast pace, and there is a very fast feedback loop as well, right? You do something today, tomorrow you will get to know what the result of your actions were, right? I think so. That impact, that feedback loop, all of that was missing, and what I also realized was, in terms of running a business, right, all the actions you take have a long-term second order, third order effect, which in consulting you will definitely not see. Even if it is an execution project, you will execute and you will leave. So I reduced cost for a certain client. I don't know what the second or third order effect on customer experience, on their churn, retention, all of those things are, right. I will not get to see that, at least in the tenure I'm there. So I think these were few of the things which I felt led to lack, or maybe ownership was there, but your ownership on the problem statements were limited. It eventually was sitting with the client, right? You were solving it for them, and the onus was there with the client. So I think that was one of the reasons why I wanted to move out, and specifically in this sector. Why Meesho and why this role? I think pretty similar. Like the opportunity, where the opportunities were. The only different thing, or the only additional thing, was when I interacted with the team. Out of the 2-3 places that I was interviewing, I think I liked the core team a lot more. I found the people a lot more approachable, reachable. Right? So I felt the team I'm going to work with was a lot nicer than the other opportunities I had. So I think that was one of the tipping points towards Meesho.
No, I've seen a lot of growth people in Meesho. I think very similar backgrounds. Most of them. I'm not sure about other firms, but Meesho specifically, I've seen a lot of people coming from IIM plus consulting backgrounds. I think. But now, I think one very important question is, what pivotal lessons did you take from consulting to growth? Right. I think this session will not be complete without that. Right. What are some of the things you took with you, and that were very that you were able to leverage from your consulting experience, if you can?
Yeah, I think hard skills which we learned,
Yeah.
right? Like the problem solving skills, like you take a very high level problem, break it down into smaller bits, a more structured bit, which I said at the beginning as well, right? I think that is one definite skill set which is valued a lot, because you try to minimize blind spots as much as you can, right? As compared to any other peer with not a similar background, right? For them it is difficult to learn. In consulting, day in, day out, you do this, right? The other thing I would say is the communication point, the point which I also mentioned, right? Being clearer in your communication, being clearer with your stakeholders, driving things, right?
Yeah.
So since you thrive in ambiguity, the key reason is that you are a lot more better at communication in terms of the clarity, in terms of the timing, everything, right? So I think these are the two things which I feel has helped me a lot which I've taken up from consulting to a growth role or to the space.
Noted.
I mentioned two other points.
Yeah.
Other because these two definitely huge things you've taken. There's two more things that I personally, felt, that consulting prepared me for this situation. One is the hustle. You're working in an environment which is like a 70-hour work week, which has also come up in the news recently. 70-hour work week, right? Consulting is exactly like that. And once you go through that, there is no situation in any other firm which which you would feel unprepared for, right? So you get that sort of a mental toughness that through consulting, that kind of a affinity to hustle, right? Which other situations don't give you. There's another one, and this is honestly, so in consulting, at least within Bain, we have this concept or this term called zero defect.
Okay.
Does that mean that you prepare your presentation in Excel, whatever, it should not have any errors? A very basic thing, but to be honest, you work with a wide, breadth of people, right? You realize that this is actually not as, common as you'd think. That, someone creates an output which is zero defect, or someone creates a thought process which is zero defect. In Unacademy, we call it obsession with a comma, for example, that even a comma is not placed incorrectly.
Okay.
Right? So I think this is something which, the kind of situation that you have in a consulting team, the kind of principles that you're taught in a consulting team, this being just one example, I think they prepare you to really deliver in the wider world, right? So those are two things I've really taken out of my consulting time, and which have helped me a lot.
In your current startup.
Absolutely.
Understood. Very valuable. How about you, Shounak? Probably again, two more things.
Well, I mean, they have already covered the entire breadth. So I think some things like, I think what consulting also teaches you is a bit of adaptability, right? And because you work with so many different things. So that is actually useful in an environment, because sometimes you have to adapt and forget some of the things which consulting teaches you, right? Because I'll tell you. So in consulting, I had a people management responsibility as well. Right? Now, the way you could push and expect people to deliver in a consulting environment, that's not how the world works, right? So you have to, if you do that in a company, any company, right, which is not in the startup or hustling phase, right? Even in the startup and hustling phase, you will not get very good output from people, right? So consulting also teaches you to adapt to other environments where you might need to work in a very unconsulting-like mechanism, and that really comes across because in consulting, a lot of cases you're presenting to the CXO, etc., but you actually have to get work done from people below it over whom you have no authority, right? So you basically have to coax people to work, and you can use multiple methods, right? Sometimes you need to go take them out for some coffee, maybe sometimes a smoke, etc., and different ways you do to kind of get them to get the work done. And it is your responsibility. You cannot come back and claim, he's not working, my project is not getting done. That's not. So there is a degree of adaptability of able to work with different kind of people, which helps very significantly when you come outside the consulting world, because consulting at the end of the day, very high performance industry, but it's a very, very, very small industry. At least among the companies which we are talking about, right? Combine all of them in India, I don't think there will be more than 4,000-5,000 employees, not beyond that. That will also be a stretch. I mean, if you take out the likes of Accenture and Deloitte and EY, I think when I was in consulting, 80 was 250 odd. I'm assuming they've doubled in size. Let's say 500, whatever, 5,000 people, right? In India, now that you guys are trying to sell to, Unacademy, etc., you know how big India is, right? So it's a bubble, right? So you have to come out of the bubble when you step out, and it at least prepares you to know enough about multiple industries, or teaches you how you can ramp up very quickly in any new space. And that is something, adaptability and ability to ramp up is something which is very important. Obviously, structured thinking and VC and all those kind of things are there, right? But I have seen that, people who are very good in other industries, they have an inherent ability to think in that way. Even though they might not be using those terms, right? People, based on experience, people have a very, very sharp, focused way of thinking, right? So that is there, but this adaptability and ability to, unlearn and learn and change is also very important. And I think in the long run, you solve business problems till only a certain point. After that, you solve people problems more often than not, or communication related problems, right? That's another thing which I think which is very changed a lot is, for example, communication, right? In consulting, your focus is very sharp, to the point, top down things, right? Works very well when you're talking to a person who's sitting on the boat, right? Can completely, bomb 2 levels below that, right? So you have to, most of the world works we call this, in consulting, we call it inductive communication, right? Majority of the people cannot absorb inductive beyond a certain degree, right? So you have to kind of change your style very often to tell people what is happening and how. So that's what you need to learn and change, and that's what I think sometimes you learn better.
Right. No, very valuable points, I think. We do have about 5-7 points which you've taken in totality from, let's say, consulting to growth. But now in your current growth role, what are the kind of problem statements you're working on? Maybe if you can, just like you did for consulting, give some examples so that we actually get to understand in your current role as a director for the sales side of things at Meesho, or let's say of academic operations at Unacademy, what are the kinds of projects you're working on? And also, what's your role in that? Like, obviously, right, the project and your role in that. If you can talk about.
Yeah, I think I can talk about one new project that we are working on. And so, for example, Meesho is an e-commerce marketplace, right? You have sellers and you have buyers on the platform, or users, consumers on the platform.
Yeah.
Now, for a larger part of this e-commerce revolution, everything, I think it was mandatory for any seller on an e-commerce marketplace to have a GST, a registered GST to come and sell, right? Now, this was a big bottleneck for the small manufacturers, small players to actually come and sell online, because their business size was not as big for them to go for a GST and some of those thresholds, right? And even once you get a GST, there are a lot of compliance that you have to work with, which was a big deterrent for them to actually get a GST and come online and sell online. So
now government has changed that.
Yeah, a big part of the selection was unlocked and was not accessible for a big part of time. In October last year is when this policy got revised, and from 1st October 2023, anyone can come and sell online without a GST. Now the constraint is that you can only sell in the state where you are based out of, right? So you cannot sell beyond the state which you are based out of. There is a geographical constraint, right? So whichever state the seller is based out of, they can sell within that state only. And there is a certain threshold of turnover and other things which are there, right? Now, this was one project which we had to ensure. So government came in June, July. During that time, they launched officially this policy. They said you have 2.5 months. Go figure out how you want to bring in. For Meesho, this was a key base, right? Because there are typically long tail sellers on the platform, bringing in new kind of selections on the platform. We do not operate with, say, now there is a mall segment as well, but it is not still a bigger part of the business, right? Bigger part of the business are individual entrepreneurs and sellers. So the first phase, which was from say July to October or August to October, was more about making your platform comply to all of this, so that even a non-GST seller, there are a lot of checks within the entire platform process where GST is mandatory, you do GST OTP verification, so many other things. How do we ensure we create similar flows first for the non-GST seller, right? Then even on the user side, there are a lot of constraints, right? This seller order cannot come from any other state. Now such constraints do not exist on the platform. So entire ranking, discovery, everything, like it was a big technical exercise, to be very honest, and making sure that we are compliant with all the policies and can onboard non-GST sellers so that they are working within this guardrail. Now the next phase, so the first phase was all about this, which we like government told it on 1st October, we were live on 2nd October to onboard non-GST sellers and to get them on platform.
I saw the post.
Yeah. So now the second phase is more about, now these seller persona is very different, right? Like they're very small sellers. They're not even comfortable getting a GST because of the compliance issue. They work out of their mobile phones, right? They do not have a laptop, they do not have a computer system to print or other things, right? So they work out of their mobile phones. They don't know how to list a product online, how do I manage my inventory, how do I sell online, how do I pack my products, right? Totally different persona, but they have a selection which is valuable to a user, which they actually want to buy, right? Now, a big part which we're trying to solve is how do we enable this user cohort, how do we get them activated, get them engaged on the platform, how do we solve their education problem? Because almost the size of the seller base is almost 5x, 6x of what a GST seller base is, right? So the amount of selection you can get on the platform will increase multifold if we are able to solve this problem. So this is where our current focus is. We're trying to solve the entire acquisition activation funnel for this cohort of sellers, trying to understand their personas, their barriers, all of those, and trying to solve for it bit by bit. I think this is one of the key projects that I've been working on over this period and this cycle, which is a lot critical.
And what's your role in this? Like you talk to sellers yourself, or you, let's say, bunch of problems, user personas, and
so I lead a team which entirely, so there's a product team, tech team, and then there's a business team. Product and tech team helps us build out all the relevant products. Business team's role is mainly to understand the problems, prioritize the problem which we want to solve, and help achieve, like create a plan around it, right? Like how will we move from point A, like today if we have say X number of sellers, how do we make it 100X over next 6 months, right? And how do we phase it out, which problems do we prioritize? Then going and speaking to the sellers speaking to seller is table stake, right? Like whenever we solve any problem statement, like listen or die is what we call it Meesho, where either you listen to your users or sellers, or it's as good as you die, right? Because you're not creating the solution for them. So I think that is the role we play, like creating out the entire roadmap, talking to sellers, going through the entire data, figuring out where the issues are, where the sellers are dropping off more, what are the issues they're facing, which metric is breaking. Prioritizing the problem statement, at times executing operational solves wherever possible. If not operational, figuring out what the product we need to build specifically for this cohort of seller, right?
Right. So it's a mix of some kind of execution, of course, and some strategy around what you need to do.
So strategy typical to consulting will happen initially.
Then
you build weekly plans, monthly plans, and start tracking against it. Figure out what needs to be executed when with the product team and the operations team.
Understood. Perfect. How about you, Sagnik?
So in the current role, what we're doing is, so the current role involves managing and building the best possible experience for every learner in our 50 centers across India, right? And
These are offline centers.
These are offline centers. So this wing is something that we started in 2022. Today it's in a position to become one of the largest business lines within Unacademy. We have around 50-60 physical locations with 36,000 learners preparing from us. So one part of it is obviously ensuring these learners have a very good experience, right? And that is a function of very tight process management and people management. So we would have around 60, for folks across all the centers in total, right? Whose core metric or core responsibility is just to ensure a great learner experience. So that is one part of the role. But then the second part is how do you build this for the future? Like say 5 years from now, 3 years from now, what would a learner experience when they are say in an Unacademy classroom or enrolled in an Unacademy offline course? Starting from what would the classroom look like? What would the educator teach? Would there be any form of in-class engagement, right, etc. So every single bit of that experience has to be stitched up for the future also.
Understood.
And this involves a lot of a lot of it is very BAU stuff, ensuring people are doing their jobs right, sort of people management, stakeholder management, talking to learners, talking to educators, figuring out the challenges. But then say a good bit of it, say 20-25% of it is also looking ahead, maybe speak. So for example, we are exploring an option, or we are exploring a solution where every learner in the class will get a device through which they can give answers to a quiz. And they'll get like a customized test report, they'll get like a personalized practice material on the basis of how well they've observed what's happening in the class. So it's a very future forward way of looking at how the classroom works. Today you go to a typical JEE coaching center, just an educator would come to class, teach a lot of concepts, teach a lot of problems, and leave.
Yeah.
That we want to revamp entirely. That's the part that we're taking care of.
Understood. So it's a mix of, again, there's a product vision that you're planning for the next 3 to 5 years, and your execution also. You're part of the execution also, right? That this is, and that's where you talked about, I think, the operations management piece as well. Right?
Absolutely.
Just in the beginning.
Absolutely. So see, I think in general, when you step into any kind of role, like after consulting a startup or you're making your own thing also, right? See, there's a time you have to spend on BAU, which is inescapable, because what's working today has to keep working. So I like to think that I spend around 70-75% of my time on that, right? But say 20-25% time you have to spend looking ahead, or else you'll end up being where you are today, right? That's also not good. And see, I think envisioning the future is also, it's very dependent on talking to the right stakeholders, but also looking out what is happening elsewhere, right? The biggest examples in terms of how a classroom experience could look like are brought to us by, on one hand, by the Nordics, but on the other hand, by say China or Singapore. China has taken it a step too far in my according to some opinions, China might have taken it a step too far, but that's also something you can learn from, right? That can you get to a stage where you can actually monitor how engaged a learner is in the class, right? This is the kind of problem statements we are trying to solve right now.
Understood. Very interesting. So Shounak, I think some of the problem statements you touched upon, but maybe if you can walk us through currently what you're focusing on.
Yeah, so no, I will not talk about what I am focusing on. That's quite boring. But I'll talk about what our organization is working on.
Yeah.
Right. So let me kind of give you certain use cases which we work with. And this is one we work with automobile manufacturer based out of Bombay. So they have been doing, for example, feedback calls with customers. Right? They're 10-15 minute conversations. Right. So what we are helping them with, and we have an IP around it also, is to be able to ingest these calls at scale and generate different kinds of insights which they want to extract from these things, right? And that insight, every study, for example, yesterday we got a request for one more study, right? How do customers perceive their infotainment system, right? So they go and they'll call to 50 people, right? And they will have these conversations coming across India. At the end of it, so how do you do it today, right? So today you will have someone who will listen to the call, take out everything which you want, put it in some Excel, and then you do the analysis and you get a report out.
I think we've covered a lot of ground around MBA consulting growth. The last question would definitely be any parting advice for people who are deciding on their career trajectories, if not specific to consulting growth, in general, at the time of transition, right, from let's say MBA to consulting or consulting to any role in a startup. How did you decide? Right? Why didn't you start Shounak?
Yeah, so I think between it, so when you go join an MBA and when you join your first profession, right? So, I mean, I would want, hopefully people are more aware of why they are taking a particular profession, etc. However, there are going to be dynamics of the Indian system which is going to drive you in a particular way. So we should be cognizant of that, right? It's very, very difficult for an individual. I've seen maybe one or two who have resisted that and done something different. So very important to be cognizant of that. And people will say things like, you should be absolutely clear about why you are going into consulting, etc. In most of the cases, for our people who are joining, that clarity is very difficult to achieve at the age at which we are, and it's okay, right? It's not that if someone has clarity and you don't, it's a problem. And if you're going with the flow because of how the industry and etc. is structured, it's fine. We should not put too much pressure on that I have figured out or not figured out. If you have figured out, very well. However, when you're moving on from consulting, right, at that point of time, you have a rich breadth of information. So at that point of time, if you're clearer about what you want to do and where you're going into, not only from a work point of view, but culture of the organization, very important. The people you're going to be working with. I think these are the two things. Obviously, I mean, pay, etc. All these things I'm not mentioning. That's the most easiest thing which people will look at. But the work which you're going to do, hopefully, if you not like your consulting experience, that is something which you like. Otherwise, it's going to be again more pain and disappointment going forward. So the work and the culture, especially when you're at least 2 to 3 years post. After MBA, I don't think that if it's a fresher, etc., right? Everything which you know is quite theoretical, right? So you can apply a lot of frameworks, but it's going to be quite different when you join the company in the first place.
Right, very practical advice, I think. How about? Yeah.
I think go to it.
Okay. So I think just to add to that, I'd say there are two things. In my parents' generation, my father studied to be a civil engineer, was a civil engineer, and till the end of his career, he was in civil engineering. Right? My elder brother, who's 10 years older than me, pretty much same trajectory. He's started off as a marketing manager, pretty much he grew to a marketing director. Now he runs his own company. But the trajectory was very consistent at a certain point of time. Today, the world changes very often, and I think it's important. One part of it is we have to be okay with it. We have to be okay with maybe not knowing where am I going to be 5 years, 10 years from now. It's a very typical question you get asked in every interview. But also we have to be adaptive. The industry you're working on today might not be the best industry to work on from a purely career perspective, right? 5 years from now, in some scenarios it might not even exist, right? So I think it's very important to be adaptive and to keep yourself in a frame where you're continuously learning, or at least open to continuously learning, because the problem statements will change in the future. At the same time, I think, one thing which we often don't realize the importance of in the younger years, right, is the importance of relationships. I think we've talked about about needing to feel well informed, right? The best information I've ever got of how an internal industry is working is from some or the other friend or say acquaintance, someone I know who's working there, who knows the realities, if this is the challenges this industry is facing, are the things positive or not? Okay, if you're considering this role, how does that role typically play out? Yeah, what does the organization need?